and welcome back to Felony Spectator. I am your host, Heather, and today we're going to chat about the murder of Larry King and the documentary called Valentines Road, which was based on the case. The documentary actually aired back in 2013, but it's still on Prime if you want to check it out, and I highly recommend that you do. What happens in this documentary is so heartbreaking and so sad, but it really brings awareness to a much bigger issue. It investigates the murder of Larry King and uncovers the town's deep-rooted homophobia. This documentary won awards, and it took 5 years for the director to complete. She had over 350 hours of footage to go through just to show you how deep the problems go in this town. I highly recommend that you watch it. There is also a book, which I will link below, called A Murder Over a Girl, which goes into more detail about the trial. Let's get into it. Valenties Road, the documentary, immediately opens up about the shooting of a boy named Lawrence King, who just turned 15 and was shot by a classmate named Brandon McInerney, who was only 14 at the time. This happened in class on February 12th, 2008. The gun Brennan used was a very small .22 caliber handgun. The shooting was very unexpected, so the teacher wasn't even really sure what the noise was right away. Brandon had smuggled it into school after taking it from his grandfather's closet. And apparently he forgot the gun that morning and just happened to remember as he was about to leave for school. So he went back in the house and got it. Now, I don't know what the gun laws are in California or what they were back in 2008, but as far as I'm concerned, nobody should have access to guns unless you're said owner of the guns and fully licensed. They should be locked up and secure, not in a closet, not in an underwear drawer, but in a very secure space. Teenagers should never be able to access weapons, period. I don't believe the grandfather was charged or responsible for his gun being the murder weapon, but maybe that law needs to change. Right off the bat, the documentary hits hard. There was a lot of interviews with students that were there that day, and the way they described the incident and how the school handled it was so sad. So immediately after the shooting, Brennan just simply walked out of the classroom and left the school. Larry was still alive, vomiting and thrashing in pain when the school went into lockdown. The kids from the computer room that witnessed what happened were simply escorted to another classroom where a teacher just popped in a movie and left. Larry was rushed to the hospital but declared brain dead with little chance to live. Sadly, he would die, but his mother kept him on life support so she could donate his organs. And he was officially dead on Valentine's Day when he gave his heart away. I always thought that if anything like a shooting were to happen at a school, it would be normal for counselors to be brought in as soon as possible, that the kids would be able to call their parents, get picked up, taken home, that there would be some sort of support. Instead of support, the kids were to sit in a classroom and watch a movie. And what movie did they get to watch? Jaws. I couldn't believe it when I heard that. Like, what? Now let's just remind ourselves what 14 and 15-year-olds are like. They're not mature, they're very emotional, and it was probably very difficult for them to process what just happened. Then to make them watch Jaws? I'm sure they were in shock, upset, traumatized. No counselors were brought in, and parents were not allowed to call and talk to their kids. It seems like everyone was expected to just pretend like it didn't happen and move on, or that it wasn't really that big of a deal, because even the next day, the school resumed like a regular school day, and they still didn't have support or counselors there. It was pretty evident how scared these kids were. Even years later, when they had to relive the shooting for the documentary, you can see that they are visibly traumatized. The only people who can witness death and carry on like nothing happened are psychopaths, not teenagers. I'm pretty sure they must have all suffered PTSD for years. Now, after Brennan ran off, he was apprehended a few blocks away from the school and brought in for questioning. And he seemed pretty calm in the interrogation room, answering questions, but didn't really seem panicked or upset. What I did notice was a kid who seemed really broken. He seemed like he already accepted his fate and was cooperative pretty much right away. He must have known he was going to be arrested, so perhaps he just thought it was over and he needed to deal with the consequences. It was kind of eerie to watch. The documentary does go more into detail about Larry and Brandon. They both came from abusive homes and from parents with drug addiction. Larry was born to a mother addicted to crack cocaine and who was also only 15 years old at the time of his birth. She ended up giving birth to another baby, Larry's little brother, and prostitution was the only way for her to earn money to provide for them. So she decided to give up her kids for adoption when Larry was only 2 and his brother was still a newborn. Gregory and Dawn King would adopt them. In the documentary, it suggests perhaps that his adoptive parents didn't provide him a good home or stable environment. But other accounts say that they tried their best, but Larry was very hyperactive and diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder, which is when a child fails to develop a relationship with its caregivers. Larry was said to be bullied a lot too because he often acted more feminine, and by the age of 10, he came out as gay. He knew he was gay and he didn't care who knew. His parents didn't actually believe that though. When Larry was in the 6th grade, there was a burn book or a Larry book, which was basically a notebook that circulated through the students, and they would write hateful things about Larry inside. One of the entries said that they hated him and wished he was dead. He was then transferred to another school, and his parents thought that perhaps a fresh start would be good for him. Now, I don't know if this number is accurate, but it said that on his CPS file, there was over 22 calls of abuse that went completely ignored. Larry had been caught shoplifting before, but it wasn't until Larry stole food because he said he was being starved that he finally got attention from authorities. It's unclear, but some accounts say that he stole food from the refrigerator in the home where he was, and I'm not sure why he wasn't allowed to eat or if he stole the food elsewhere. Gregory King denies that was never the case and there was never abuse in the home. He goes on to say that a counselor suspected that Larry may be autistic, and the same counselor also suspected that Larry was trying to get attention and might not fully understand what it meant to be gay. And I find that very sad that a professional wouldn't support a child who just wanted to express themselves. Perhaps he didn't really know gay, but he knew he liked to be more feminine. It didn't take long before Larry started telling teachers about being abused, so authorities removed Larry from Gregory and Dawn King's home. Larry was sent to a place called Casa Pacifica, which is a shelter for kids without a place to live. Some are transitioning from foster care, and some are just temporarily there for other reasons, like Larry. But it was here where he finally found some peace and really got a chance to be himself. Some would say that he was his happiest living at Casa Pacifica, and Larry had started to become very interested in makeup, wearing women's clothing and heels, and he was who he was and made the choice to let his true self out. Other kids at the shelter liked Larry, and they didn't care that he dressed differently. His friends said that he was the nicest person, flamboyant, but also very nice. Brandon was also from a home where he probably felt unloved too. His bio dad actually shot his mother in the arm during a dispute. She lived, but it shattered her elbow. Billy, his dad, also hit Brandon, his brothers, and his mom. He was just a very abusive person and drank a lot. Sadly, his mom was a meth addict. She claimed she was high functioning, but at one point she was forced to finally enter rehab, so Brandon lived mainly with his dad, Billy. Unfortunately, his dad also did drugs and was an alcoholic. So Brandon was just around addicts his whole life and didn't really have any role models whatsoever. It was later revealed that he actually was also sexually molested as a kid, allegedly by an uncle. His dad worked in another town more than 60 miles away, and his older brother left home, so Brandon was all by himself a lot of the time and just very neglected. He became very angry. However, despite this, his brothers say that Brandon wasn't a bad kid. He didn't party, didn't drink, or do anything that would make people suspect that he was dangerous. He just had a lot of deep down anger, but most of the time he was just quiet. Speculation about the motive is that Brandon was mad at a game the students at the school played called the Valentines game. And I guess students go up to people, maybe on a dare, and ask other kids if they want to be their Valentines. Not much of a game. I'm sure all schools do something similar, but it's Valentine's, so stuff like that's going to happen. And Larry got dared to ask Brennan if he would be his Valentines. During this dare, it said that he also said, "I love you, baby." And this was apparently one of the straws that broke the camel's back. Brennan was embarrassed and all his friends laughed. They would also tease Brennan and say that he was Larry's boyfriend or that Brennan was gay, which made him furious. He did not like being someone's joke, and Brennan wasn't interested in men, and I guess he just took offense to this. Now, men out there, if you get hit on by another man, don't be mad. That's really stupid. Take it as a compliment. There's no need to be offended if someone else finds you attractive, okay? Some students would say that Larry had been bothering Brennan for some time. He was infatuated by him, and I would assume that he probably just had a crush on him. With that said, Larry did do things to get people riled up. So he would often sweetly say hi to the jocks or sit with them at the lunch table uninvited. So yeah, he did do some things for attention, but I personally don't think he meant any harm. He was just a kid. But people thought it was Brennan that was being bullied by Larry, and it was Larry's own fault that Brennan got so mad. Larry also started to cross-dress at school. He brought a pair of brown heeled boots and would wear them to school. Brandon, I guess, had a problem with this too, as did many of the other students. Brennan's girlfriend was interviewed, as was other girls, and it just seemed like they didn't like it because they didn't wear heels. And they just felt accessories were not for a boy. So I don't know if the kids even realized they were being homophobic. What Larry wears has nothing to do with them. After the incident where Larry asks Brendan to be his Valentine, Brendan goes up to one of Larry's friends and tells her, "Say goodbye to your friend because you're not going to see him again tomorrow." Later that night, Brendan took his dad's gun and decided to bring it to school the next day to shoot Larry. Ironically, the day Larry was murdered, he wasn't even wearing makeup and wasn't wearing his heels. He looked rather plain and ordinary. He had mentioned that morning to a counselor at Casa Pacifica that, quote, he'd had enough. And I guess the bullying was a lot, even for Larry. And that day he told his friends that he ran out of makeup, ran out of hair product, and that wasn't even true. He just probably was exhausted by all the judgments. So Larry walked to class that morning and sat down at a computer in the computer lab for English class. It said that Brendan had been looking at Larry during class. Larry was at the front of the classroom and Brendan was closer to the back. Larry wrote Laticia King on his paper that morning and said out loud to one of his friends that he was going to change his name to Laticia. And that's what the kids in the class thought maybe triggered Brennan. He stood up, walked up to Larry, and shoots him in the back of the head 2 times right there in the classroom. After this event, we learn that there is a much bigger issue than a couple of kids who didn't get along. And it's not just Brennan who is being homophobic. The judgmental people in this town are everywhere. Larry was just exploring his sexuality. He wasn't even sexually active and admitted that he never even had his first kiss yet. He just liked to be feminine. It was also only 2 weeks before he got killed that he started to wear makeup to school or his heels. Some accounts say that he had been wearing nail polish long before. Lots of people think girls should dress like girls and boys should dress like boys. And if a boy dresses like a girl, they're being distracting and should stop. And boys who wear girls' clothing are being disrespectful to others, and it's their own fault that they're drawing unwanted attention towards themselves. And some of the teachers go on to say that they asked Larry to stop and suggested that they try to inform him that other kids would be mean to him or bad things would happen to him if he continued. To me, that's a problem. He wasn't breaking a dress code, so they're all just enforcing negative behavior of others. Why weren't these teachers telling the bullies to leave Larry alone? Why do victims have to change to appease people? Why can't people just mind their own business? Why concern yourself or worry about what someone else is wearing? The documentary further shows the discrimination and victim blaming, which is so frustrating. Listening to the excuses from grown-ass adults justifying a murder is gross. There is a teacher they feature, and it seems like for her, religion plays a part in her judgment. And she says, quote, "He shouldn't have been so blatantly, openly expressing himself transsexually. I do believe in a heaven and a hell, and I do believe that Larry wasn't aware of the consequences for his actions. I relate to Brennan because I can see myself in that position. I don't know if I would have taken a gun, but a good swift kick in the butt might work well," end quote. And what she says really showcases the narrow-mindedness of a lot of people in this town. A lot of the kids just thought the way he dressed wasn't part of the dress code or fair. It was a private school with pretty strict uniforms, and being a junior high school, I can see how students could get carried away with this drama. Junior high is full of hormonal preteens, and the adults in this school, teachers, principals, really needed to step up and show the kids compassion and acceptance. If the girls can wear a bit of makeup, then so can Larry or anyone. Someone from the school did call the district to ask about boys wearing makeup, heels, jewelry, and it was confirmed that girls could accessorize, so Larry could too. They couldn't discriminate against Larry, so they did sort of allow Larry to express himself, but they didn't really want him to. An email did go out to every teacher with the subject line, "Students' Rights," and it went on to say that there was a student who was expressing themselves with makeup and it was his right to do so. It even mentions that some kids were okay with it and some kids were curious and others it bothered. It requests that teachers talk to the students about being civil and non-judgmental, but that didn't happen, not according to the student interviews anyway. 2 teachers, in fact, tried to protest what was happening. One in particular says that she went to the principal and said she thought Larry was being a danger to himself and that he could possibly fall in his heels and hurt his ankles. I like how she disguises her displeasure with concern. Lots of the kids that were teasing Larry also teased his little brother, saying that if Larry was gay, then he must be gay too. These kids were just so cruel. The school did have a bit of a memorial held on school campus, and some students got to speak, and they would describe him as brave, unique, and compared to a garden that was growing but died. After hearing that, a friend of Brendan's would whisper, "That's so gay." After that day, the kids apparently were not allowed to discuss what happened at all. One of the students planted a tree to honor Larry, but couldn't officially say that either, or the school would have removed the tree. How insane is that? Most teachers felt that Larry shouldn't have drawn attention to himself, and he should have just washed the makeup off his face. One teacher, Mrs. Boldrin, was not that way, and she supported Larry, and she actually gave him a green dress that used to be her daughter's. And Larry loved it, and he wanted to wear it to prom. He was so excited to have it. The vice principal was also an advocate of Larry, and she tried to support his wearing of makeup and heels as well. She was also a lesbian, so I think she had a lot of compassion for Larry. She probably knew what he was going through, and she had probably suffered herself at some point too. One of Larry's classmates had actually come out as a lesbian the same year Larry embraced his sexuality. But for some reason, people didn't have a problem with her as much. She claimed that the boys were actually nicer to her because she started acting like one of the guys. I would suspect, and this is just my opinion, that it was probably easier for her because she didn't flaunt it or taunt people with her sexuality. She just wore slightly baggier clothing, and that's about it. But Larry was very feminine, and his appearance was more drastic than just wearing baggier clothing. Larry's family blamed the school for allowing Larry to wear makeup and feminine clothing, alleging that it was his flamboyance that led to his death. His father, Greg King, still doesn't think his son was ever gay, and he's resentful that the gay community is using his son's death as a part of a larger cause. And it's very sad to me to hear that he's putting blame on his own son. His father really could have learned a lot from Larry. And some accounts say that Brennan was somewhat obsessed with Nazis. They found notebooks full of sketches, books that he was reading, and he was also hanging out with known skinheads. And Brennan knew a lot about Hitler and the names of all of Hitler's deputies. His dad claimed that his son just watched the History Channel and it was mostly World War II that he was interested in. His brother also at one point claimed that the books were his. It's hard to know for sure, but we do know that Brennan was angry. The sketches and books in Brandon's backpack do seem intense, and if one of my kids were drawing those pictures, I'd be concerned. With that said, Brandon did apparently have Black friends, and one even testified at the trial that Brandon never talked about white power. In the documentary, there was a group of ladies sitting around a table chatting over a coffee or something, and they're shown discussing Brandon's fascination with the Nazis and just saying, meh, kids doodle, Brandon was young, he wasn't a white supremacist. And I believe a teacher defends him as well, saying that it was normal for kids to become interested in Nazis once they learn about it. But these ladies go on to say that Larry was being overly flamboyant and, quote, Brandon was just solving a problem, end quote. Brandon did admit to the murder, but the prosecution needed to figure out if the murder was premeditated. Brandon did plan it the night before, and he admitted to Larry's friend the day before, too, that he was going to shoot Larry. He took his father's gun the morning of the murder and then executed Brandon. But the defense tried to twist it and say that it was Larry who was the bully, and Larry's flamboyance in asking him to be a Valentine was just provoking Brandon and is what led to him shooting Larry. The prosecution tried for first-degree murder and used hate crime as their motive, specifically gender hate. But unfortunately, during Brandon's first trial, the jury was deadlocked, so it was declared a mistrial. It said it was because that many of the jurors didn't really feel like it was a hate crime. There was no denying that he did it, but they just weren't convinced Brandon did it out of hate. And some really thought he was provoked into it. There was a second trial, and Brandon thankfully this time pled guilty of second-degree murder in a plea deal and got 21 years. And I think his plea deal of second degree was probably a good idea because he probably would have had another mistrial or even gotten off if prosecution tried for first degree murder again. And Brandon was also tried as an adult. Near the end of the documentary, there is a woman who says, 21 years seems like a long time for murder. It's not like he kidnapped or tortured Larry. What? So I guess she's saying that he needed to torture Larry for you to think 21 years was justifiable, not just a murder. I wonder if she would feel the same way if the victim was someone in her family. I feel like everyone should watch this documentary. It was so eye-opening, and it just really makes you realize how society hasn't come that far at all, how we need to be more accepting and less judgmental of other people. Thankfully, the school has changed. They now encourage acceptance and inclusion and even have a gay-straight alliance called PRISM that meet weekly and creates a safe place for LGBTQ2 youths. This month is Pride Month, so I wanted to do this case to honor Larry and for anyone who feels like they're being bullied, hurt, or discriminated against. Be your authentic self and know that the world is an amazing place because we're not all the same. Stay strong and know that there's no place for discrimination here. Felony Spectator will always be a safe place, and we will never tolerate bullying. I also want you to know that there are a lot of true crime podcasts that support the LGBTQ2 community. I'll link some in the comments section below, and you should check them out for yourself. There's so many good ones. Thanks again for joining me here. Hit subscribe if you like my stuff, and we'll see you next week.